But man, freaking Ben Uyeda in the flesh, bro. I have I don't know if I've ever been as excited to talk to anybody on a podcast as I've been excited to talk to you. And there's a lot of reasons behind it. For anybody who doesn't know who Ben Uyeda is, Ben Uyeda is, let's see here if I know your bio correctly, architect, turned YouTuber slash investor slash inventor slash influencer, which is the best title of them all. What else is in there? I think you consult too. Don't you consult on businesses?
Yeah, and quite a few things. I think what happens is, right, when you get a little bit of financial comfort and you don't run yourself into the red on your main gig that brings in most of your revenue and stuff like that, it lets you kind of develop all these renaissance skills. Whereas I've never been that interested in pedal to the metal on a linear pursuit for my main thing. So I've always carved out a little bit of time to explore other interests and then tried to make up for the efficiency lost by weaving them back into the main interest so that I don't feel like I'm getting sidetracked and losing productivity, because that's always the nagging worry for entrepreneurs such as ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you say you have a specific, like a ratio that you said you don't go into your main thing, pedal to the metal, but like, do you have like a ratio that you kind of designate where you're like, hey, listen, I'll focus on this 60, 70, 80%. And then the rest of the 20, 30, 40% is more of a like, let's diversify our funds, like Wu-Tang Clan likes to say.
Loosely, I'll plan out sort of goals for the year. So the goal for this year was, I realized that just focusing on bigger audience, bigger brand deals, more money, which is still the majority of my business, is making YouTube videos, syndicating old YouTube videos onto Facebook, signing brand deals with companies I want to work with, and then getting paid for product integration into YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook content. That's still the bread and butter. But I think what I sort of saw happening over the last few years is slight plateauing. I think you experienced some incredible growth over these last 18 months, I would say, right?
Maybe even less. I would say for me, it was like a solid, I think, 12 months. I think 12 months ago today, actually, 4 weeks from today is when my life changed drastically.
Right. It's when you start doing publishing those bigger renovation projects.
Yeah. And I think I got maybe 3 deep before, one video sparked and ignited, I think, 6 of my videos in a row. And I think that from that point on, I became what I would consider a real life YouTuber.
Right. And probably your audience more than doubled in this last year, or tripled, or?
It tripled for sure. It was such a fast momentum where I hit my first 100K, I think, January of last year. And then I hit my second 100K at 200K in 4 weeks later. You know what I mean? And then I hit another like 70K, like another 4 weeks later. So it's like, yeah, the growth was through the roof.
So there's moments in business where you got the hot hand, and and it's like NBA jams. Just keep shooting, pull up from 30 feet, and keep firing. Right when you feel that. And so I don't think it pays. So I try to be strategic, but not in the moment, not every week. Like, what is my strategy for this week? Kind of year over year. And the reason why is because sometimes you get on a hot streak like that. And if you're on that, if you see that happening in real time, any strategy you previously conceived wouldn't be worth dropping to just, all right, I need to just get content out. It's working. Audience is growing. That's incredible, right? Yeah. In a normal business, 20% growth year over year is excellent. And the fact that you had 100% growth in 4 weeks is just insanity. Right. So that happens a lot in the type of work that we do, which is why I kind of like loose strategies as opposed to sort of really rigid ones. It's not like we're a VC firm that's doing hundreds of deals a year and really just needs to know the percentages all the way down, put them all into a spreadsheet, and make sure that we're improving like a little tiny percent with each one. We're doing this a little bit more by touch and feel, but still need to be somewhat rigorous and strategic. So the way I'll kind of look at it is much more broadly. And what I've started to see in the last couple of years, and I've been doing this for about 6 years now, is not that explosive growth anymore. There was plenty of years where I was, probably for 3 or 4 years, I was doubling the audience every year and that was awesome. But then once I hit sort of 1 million subscribers, it started to more tail up. The money was still going up, but I wasn't seeing that same I wasn't going from 1 million to 2 million. So I said, well,
what do you think that is? Do you have a theory behind that?
I don't know. I mean, it might be that I'm missing some things, that it might be that I'm losing motivation and repeating. It could be that I'm getting comfortable, meaning that the money's good, bills are getting paid, and setting stuff aside, so I'm not experimenting as wildly as I used to. It could also be that I'm being distracted by some of the other things that I'll share in a little bit. But I don't worry too much about it. I then just go, well, what are the opportunities if I'm not spending all my 60 to 70 hours a week focusing on audience growth? Could I, if a plateau can work both ways, right? So I saw that from like 2018 to sort of 2020, I was more growing about 20% year over year. Still great. So I said, now, if that's happening, what if I scaled back how much I work? So in 2018, I said, I'm just not going to work as hard, put out as many videos. I'm going to focus on a couple other big projects, namely the shipping container house. And I'm going to pull back on my main thing because the plateau might work in reverse, where I might be able to maintain that 20% growth by not working 70 hours a week, by working like 35. And then that gives me that 35 hours to put towards a new venture. And in that case is when I sort of built the shipping container house. And then that whole other channel blew up and created a whole nother media asset. So I kind of doubled my revenue for that year simply by creating this other asset. And I didn't really hurt Homemade Modern, my main channel, that much. So it's a great lesson where the minute you think you're static, it might mean that you're actually in a cruise control position, which gives you some free time and energy. So I never look at those things inherently as like a bad thing. They might actually be really great. It just might be that you have this so on lock that you can kind of cruise, which gives you time for other things. Yeah. So once I learned that with building the shipping container house, I said, well, I don't really want to go back to working 70 hours a week, just cranking out the same DIY videos I've been doing for, 5 or 6 years. Yeah. So I said, well, what are the parts of the job that I don't really enjoy? And it was mostly sort of locking down the brand deals and figuring that out. And I thought it'd be really cool if I just owned my own sponsors. And so this last year, I've been focusing, and you alluded to the investment part, on investing in startups that I want to work with to feature their products into my content. And that way, I never have to get approval. I can only work with things that I want. I have paths for my own product development. And so I've been investing in companies like Semi-Exact, which makes hairpin legs right here in America. Yeah. In a company called Hook, which makes sustainable furniture in Brooklyn. A few other ones that I can't really announce yet, but one's going to be a liquor company, and then one's a hotel and hospitality company.
Jeez, Ben Uyeda, jeez.
Well, no, it's not. They're not huge amounts of money, but
no, it's not even the money. It seems to me like what I'm so impressed by you is your bandwidth, like the ability to be stretched so far. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like you don't have assistants or anything like that working for you, right? I don't even think you have an agent, if I'm correct.
No, I do have an agent, but they're strictly for the content business. And then Jessie, my sister, helps me out a lot. But I've had bigger teams before. Like the biggest team I ever had was 11 people for a previous company. And I'm not a good manager. I'll like to disappear for a week and won't give anyone instructions. I'm a good mediator and moderator of people. I'm good at peacemaking. I'm not good at sort of dictating. Um, so I don't like to have a big team. It also, I feel like the bigger the team you get, the more the tail ends up wagging the dog. You end up sort of taking on projects to keep your team busy and trying to manage that flow. Whereas I think what I'm good at is speculating and kind of doodling out in the business sense different ideas. But I don't think it's really about, I don't think you have to worry about getting spread too thin if you just know what your capacity is and acknowledge that. And that's why I think it's so important of, before I sort of, did things like the container house, I didn't add that. I waited for that plateau in the other business and then downshifted and cut out those 35 hours that created the room for it. So we all have the same amount of time every single day. Like, you can't cheat sleep. We all need to eat. We all need to spend some time with family and friends and have some downtime. So from there, it's really just about it's just strategically using those hour resources really well. And that's why I think it's so important to know where you're growing and where you're not growing, and don't just keep, like, I love like that Cameron Haynes saying, sort of the keep hammering, right?
Yeah.
And on one hand, I do like these kind of like ultra disciplined type dudes, right? Like the Cameron Haynes, the Jockos, the David Goggins and stuff, right? But that works much better for sort of like athletic and fitness performance. It's not necessarily great advice entrepreneurially, because it could mean that you're exhausting a lot of effort resources towards something that has diminishing returns. So
Now let me ask you this: when you find that sorry to interrupt you there, but when you find a plateau, or when you acknowledge a plateau in something, and if I understood correctly, you're kind of redirecting some of that energy towards somewhere else. Are you fearful of that, by redirecting that energy somewhere else, that could be more beneficial at that time of that plateau, that downshift, that you're going to be taken away? Like, my mindset is if I take away, or if I downshift on, let's say, like right now, I feel like you're preaching to the choir, where I had this like exponential growth, and then now I kind of plateaued, where I'm like, yeah, I'm growing by, X amount of followers, subscribers, which is a significant amount a month, but it's definitely not what it was, right? And so I'm definitely experiencing that plateau, and I'm still getting the viewership that I want, but it's not that hot streak that I experienced before. And so my fear, if I downshift and I redirect a quarter of that energy somewhere else, I won't be able to get out of this plateau to hit another spike. You know what I mean? Are you
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that is something, it's kind of like Jenga, where you give it a little bit of tug and you kind of watch, does everything fall over? Because you don't want to be impatient either. So you definitely want to like observe these things over time and make your movement subtly, not overly dramatically. Because there's perfectly good ideas that just might not have matured yet, and you could easily give up on them too soon. But the thing I would say to remember is, it probably took you a lot longer to edit your first 5 videos than your last 5 videos. Correct? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, but I've also finally scaled up to the point where I don't edit anymore, right? So like, it gives me the bandwidth to focus on something else. Like right now, I did open up some more business opportunities that I get to pursue, because I kind of opened the door a little bit.
You're able to, over growth from when you started to now, you're able to produce the same amount with less of your effort, right? So
Correct.
So that's the opportunity, right? So the question is, if you carve out that time, where do you invest that time? It could be in just the same amount of videos, but bigger projects that take more project planning, more coordination. It could be in integrating more sponsors. It could be in new media endeavors like a podcast or a totally different branch or line of that. It could be developing your own merch. These are all things that I think you're doing. The question is would that time be better spent just developing more YouTube content, which is probably your primary revenue? Or would these new things open up new possibilities that can then be circled back in around? There's no direct right answer for this, and you can't know. It's really about sort of experimenting. But the thing to remember is you're going to get more efficient at everything that you do, if you're good at this, right? Like you're going to increase your output per hour. And so it's looking for where you reinvest those hours that you end up saving. I think that becomes really important. When you publish the video, it's almost a little bit outside of your control. Yes, you can do a little bit of promotion and stuff like that. So that's why I focus so much on what happens before I hit the publish button, much more than I do on watching what happens after I publish or hit that publish button, because that I don't control. What I can control is my efficiency of production, how long it takes, the quality of the ideas, and those kind of things. So what I try to do is every year get more efficient at that, which creates time for these new side endeavors. The other thing that inevitably happens to entrepreneurial people is they accumulate a lot of side hustles. They get, because everyone says, oh, diversify your revenue. So you have a merch line, you have podcasts, and you have all these other things. But you can, as you keep adding those, it's really helpful after a while to start purging the underperformers, which can be a little bit tricky because you invested time into them, but not purging those things. Like I thought about doing merch. I think I did it like for a couple weeks early on. It was fine. The hardcore people really liked it, but I cut it and I've never looked back because I didn't know anyone in our space that was really killing it with merch. Some people do pretty good, and there definitely is some huge possibilities if you push it all the way. So it is a good idea. But I felt like if I did do it, it would keep me from thinking about something else that was maybe big. So I've always kind of watched it. And if I ever saw someone create a path or a strategy that I thought where it could be like the one of the top 3 kind of revenue producers for somebody with an audience similar in size to mine, I would take note.
Now, do you ever challenge it? Because clearly we subscribe to the same mindsets of guys like Goggins and Haynes and all these savages. Do you have that thought in your mind where you look at our space, which is the DIY, woodworking, whatever, and then you look at the outside spaces like vloggers and stuff like that, and you, like, for example, like the first name that crossed my mind is like David Dobrik, who like apparently destroys in merch, right? So do you have that competitive nature where you go, oh, if you can succeed, I can succeed, kind of?
But I will look more at like someone like Jessica Alba or what like George Clooney did. George Clooney made more money with Nescafe and his tequila than he did with any of the movies that he was in combined. Jessica Alba is a billionaire from the Honest Company, building that sort of domestic soap and home goods brand. So I think the thing that I look at is I've carved out a really comfortable living as an influencer. Like, it's great. Super grateful for it. Don't take it for granted. Love doing it. It's creatively fulfilling, and the financial compensation is excellent. But I don't think I'm going to be the person that 10x's my audience over the next 3 years and builds this massive media channel. But I'm still interested in growth. So the question has been, how do I, from year 1 from years 2 to year 5, I 10x'd. But how do I do that from year 6 to year 8 or 9? And I don't think it's going to just be as linear through trying to get up to 10 million subscribers and sell a bunch of merch and have a huge Patreon. I think it's going to be, because I don't think the thing that I do best is make the videos or be an on-air personality. I think what I'm good at is the other things. And so this is where I think the limits of that Goggins, Jocko kind of mentality of just keep hammering. I think it's more I would think of it as a slight adjustment of like keep testing and keep experimenting.
Keep
more
moving.
than just like head down and just swinging. That works great for marathons, but not necessarily for like climbing, where you have to really pick your course out, where there's a little bit more strategic response that's improvisational mixed into it. So I love that when I'm like tired as like a motivational thing to just to finish strong each day. There's a ton of value in that. but it's not a substitute for thinking creatively and testing different things. So when I think about what we have right now is we have capital in the form of sort of revenue. Being able to reach a large amount of people gives you an access to making a really good living. So we have a little bit of money. But more importantly, we have capital in the form of attention. We have an audience. And so we can spend that capital without using it up, especially if we treat it with respect and don't sort of, spam out our audience. So I was like, oh, well, if I have this audience of like a little over 1 million people, and I can show them something that I'm excited about and they don't go away. So theoretically, I could keep showing them all sorts of new things, all sorts of new products. So the real opportunity is owning new products to show them. Mm-hmm. And the more I own, the more I can show them. And if they're really, if I stay true to my ethic, and my taste, which is what built that audience in the first place, there's no reason why I can't show them an unlimited number of new products that I sort of own. And that doesn't have to just be physical products. It's like if I build a hotel, which is one of the things that I'm sort of working on, and they like the way I make design and spaces, I can probably get them to come stay at them. And if the hotel has 50 rooms and each room is then available 350, 360 nights a year, then I think that works really well for selling out a small hotel in a cool location that's all my design to an audience of my size. So those are the ways where I can kind of like start to grow is I can keep the exact same audience, but if I develop 10 products and each one of them brings in revenue relative to that, that's how I can 10x revenue and income and opportunity in all these kind of ways. Yeah. The other thing that I sort of realized is that because I have this audience, I can raise capital and to mix in with my own capital as I develop these projects. Is the container house, when I built that, I found some people that have a sort of professional real estate background.
Explain to people what your, because I know exactly what you're talking about, your container house, but for those who don't know, tell a little bit about that, because that's an incredible project.
Yeah, so for Homemade Modern, which was always my main channel, it was like, medium to small DIY projects, very similar to what you're doing. One week I'd build like a coffee table or a furniture build. Next week I might spend 2 or 3 weeks doing a big home improvement project. Channel did really well, built up a lot of subscribers. But my background in architecture, I'd always want to get back to building whole buildings. So I partnered with Home Depot and did a 9-part series on a totally new channel that showed from start to finish how to build a shipping container house in Joshua Tree, California. And we showed everything, how to get building permits, how much, how to do the foundations, how to deal with a building code, all that kind of stuff. It did really well, did about 20 million views across those 9 episodes. And but it led to these really interesting opportunities with real estate professionals. And I partnered with a guy named Adam who has a background in real estate and finance. And he said, this is awesome. This house is killing it on Airbnb. We should be doing like 20 more of these. And so we, right at the beginning of COVID, we put together a business plan, actually right before COVID. COVID hit and we're like, oh man, we're going to go out to raise investment, like right when people are like thinking about buying gold and Bitcoin. But yeah, we went out and raised about $2.5 million, all based on a project that I had done for YouTube. And this is what's really exciting is that I didn't have to spend time searching for this. It's like the ancillary benefit of doing what we do is that you're throwing things out there for your audience all the time, and they are sharing it with other people. So what was cool was I wasn't intentionally looking for this kind of opportunity with the container house, but the more people you reach, the more opportunities sort of come your way. And just the other day, I don't check my kind of like spam folder on Instagram too much because it's a lot of garbage in there. And lately, oddly enough, people asking for feet photos, like real weird.
Oh, that's cool. Double down, Ben.
Nah. OnlyFans coming soon. New income line.
Diversify.
but it was a guy that just had a liquidity event using tech and software. He saw about the shipping container house, and he has done his research. So he just had a windfall of about just under $1 million for his tech company. So his tax burden is going to go way up this year. But he's looking for depreciating real estate assets that he can use it on before the end of the year. And shipping container or modular buildings, absent the land, or things like Airstream trailers, you can depreciate a lot. And then if you figure out a way to kind of deploy them and use them to actually generate revenue, it'd be a really good investment relative to tax burden strategy. So now he's offering me like a percentage of this money based on my sort of design abilities and a business that can both help him his sort of tax burden and sort of generate revenue in a similar way that I've already demonstrated. So these are the kind of things that I'm thinking about, is not just do more of the same, make more videos, get more subscribers, sign slightly higher brand deals. It's what are the other things that I'm discovering along the way, and who could they benefit them? And then of those people that I could benefit, which ones have something to offer back to me in either the form of investment capital, project management. I'm not very good at with the sort of like Excel spreadsheets and building pro formas. I'm good at the creative side and good at the broad strategy, not the implementation detailed strategy. So it's just been sort of being flexible and realizing like whatever I've done so far isn't the answer to what I want to do forever. It's just been a good ladder to the height that I'm at. But if I want to keep going higher, I might need some help from other people, and I might want to listen to what they think I'm good at and what they want from me, more than me just trying to keep doing what I think is going to be best for me.
Does this is any of this driven from, like with me, I know exactly what you're talking about. You're kind of almost using YouTube as like once you've kind of figured out how to run it and be efficient with it, you're almost treating it like a stepping stone to the next thing, right? Or something that's assisting you to kind of fuel the other things. And I've caught myself in a situation right now where like I'm kind of diversifying. I started the podcast. I started I creating we're working on a product launch that we're doing. I have a merch line. And so you're catching yourself kind of diversifying all these other business opportunities. But with me, it's driven from fear. The fear is, well, what happens if one day Instagram shuts down? Well, you don't have Instagram. Well, you have a Facebook now. Okay, well, what happens when Instagram and Facebook shuts down? Or what happens when we hit an adpocalypse like we did in, was it 2008 or 2015? So nobody's making money on YouTube. So my all of my steps are driven from fear of like everything going away. So if I can diversify, then everything, unless the internet shuts down, then you know what I mean, then I'll go broke. So does yours come from any fear, or is it more of just this like what else can we create kind of thing?
There's always that fear and anxiety, to be sure. I don't think I think that's more of a motivator and a fuel than a pathway to follow. Like, I don't think following fear is good, but it's good for helping you run a little bit faster. So I'd say it's more of like the turbo boost than a compass to sort of guide you. Because I think when you just do inventory of what you're sort of good at, and it's not that you're good at YouTube, you're good at efficiently making video and audio and pictorial content that resonates with people. So if a platform goes away, that skill can be applied to a different platform. So I think that's the thing that keeps me worrying about sort of YouTube or Instagram or any of these things sort of falling. I would look a little bit broader and past that. That's why I never worry about, oh my God, they changed the algorithm, right? And quite frankly, it could be a great thing if YouTube went away. YouTube's been my number one content that I focused on for a really long time. But now I'm making more money off of Facebook than I am off of YouTube. And I partnered with a production company that sort of re-edits my videos. And the sort of automated ads on those Facebook videos is way higher than what I'm doing off of YouTube now. And so like a great example is because the Facebook audience is much more kind of like trashy and gimmicky.
It's very trashy.
Right. So it's like a video I made a while back for a sponsor was I turned a golf club and an old circular saw blade into a deathly dangerous weed whacker. So I cut the driver in half, sharpened the circular saw blade, and then bolted it on, and it was like a really effective weed whacker because carbon fiber shaft, really lightweight.
Did you read the comments on your stuff? Because I know you probably don't, right? But did you by any chance glance at, like, that's one video that I'd be like, I'm curious what people will.
Yeah. So did not do well on YouTube, right? So it's kind of a gimmicky idea, but people, at least in our subscriber base, didn't really want to watch this whole project. I think they saw the thumbnail and just passed on it. So maybe it did under 100,000 views on YouTube, which is not great, but whatever. If it still does 50,000 views or 70,000 views or whatever it is, still a lot of people. But put it up on Facebook and well over 1 million views, like right away, right? So what that tells me is that, like, I thought that video would do a little bit better on YouTube than it did. I wasn't too sure because it's kind of an unusual project for me. So what I look at is what I'm good at shouldn't be indicated just by the first result of what I intended at. My skill for that project isn't the number of views that I got. It's that I had a silly idea. I made that silly idea it was a 1-day build, and I made a video and then edited the video another day. So in a 48-hour span, I went from sort of idea to a finished video file. And if I judged my ability just as a YouTuber, I would think that I'm not good at my job. But on a different platform, that video made a lot more money. And I was able to send it to the sponsor that was integrated the first one, being, oh yeah, remember how you were didn't get that many views on that? Well, just got you 10x that on a different platform. You're welcome.
It's fascinating with you, Ben, because what I've learned from you is you never look at something as a win or a W or an L in terms of like how a video performs. Like with me, and I think everybody else on our platform, we're like, oh, that video tanked. Like I made a video and it tanked. And what we consider tank is like, okay, so we'll have an audience of X, and then an average video, is Y, and then we got, Z on whatever. And then if it's like half of that, we're like, oh, it blew. Like for me, like I'm like, oh, if I got 50,000 views on a video, I'm like, man, that video tanked. But you're very optimistic because I remember talking to you about, like you were very instrumental about in my growth on YouTube because you welcomed me to like ask you a lot of these questions of just like figuring out how do I stay in my lane. And I remember you even asking me, you're like, okay, so in 30 days or whatever, how many subscribers did you lose? And I was like, well, I think we're talking about should I do voice or audio or voiceover or talk to the camera? And you're like, how many people did you lose? And I'm like, well, not much really. And he's like, well, there you go. Then it's working. So like, you're always looking things as it almost seems like everything almost is a win in your book. It's just the percentage of a win, which is really encouraging to hear. It's kind of opening.
It has to do fundamentally with the way our businesses are built. We have low overhead and high upside. So it's why I don't like listening to, it's why I think a lot of complaints in our industry are sort of overblown. Like it's really hard to have a failure, right? Like the only way you could do a project, Alex, that is like a failure would be if it was something you spent like $20,000 on and then it got like very low views. Right? That would be a failure. That would be a project and it took you like a month to build. That would be an L. But a project that you spend a week on that underperforms in terms of your average views, but you don't spend a ton of money on time and materials on, you complete it during a week, you get it out, it gets some view numbers, and you get, maybe 100 new subscribers. That's still a win. It's not a big win, but your business isn't worse off. It's better off. It's not better off at the proportional speed and metric that you would like to see, but you're still not worse off. And so that's the big thing that I like to sort of reframe first is be really clear about when you're actually losing and when you're only just not going quite as fast as you want. And those early conversations we would have, I would be like, you're framing this as if you're not doing well, when really it's just that you're not doing well at the speed that you would like to do it. And that was, I think the early suggestions I had was to mix in really intentional big projects in with the sort of smaller ones, and not try to sort of like, you're not going to find consistently quick, easy gimmick things that perform well over and over and over again. You'll get lucky with a couple of them every once in a while, but really it's going to be strategically placing big home renovation, big ambitious builds that do big numbers in with some projects where you just got to get a video out for a sponsor or just to keep the channel sort of moving and flowing. And then don't beat yourself up over, like, you want to develop a good mid-range game too. So if you hit like a 15-foot, mid-range shot, take it. Right. It's not a dunk, it's not a three-pointer, but it's still points.
Do you want to hear the best advice you've ever given me? This is hilarious. I share this all the time. It was so I think you and I have personally known each other. I think for about 2 years now, maybe a little bit over 2. And I remember when I was making those gimmicky projects in the very beginning, right? Like stuff that nobody's searching for, but I'm just making it. Nobody knows who I am. I think I was like maybe 2,000 subscribers in, or right. I remember asking, and I because like as a brand new video creator, and I think a creator at any aspect, you do what everybody does. I think is you find the people you idolize, right, and then you mimic them. So if I'm watching a lot of Casey Neistat stuff, and I'm like, I want to start a YouTube channel in the DIY world, there's going to be a lot of things that I'm, in terms of creating and production of the content, that's going to be kind of replicating Casey Neistat's, whether it's the B-roll or the vlog style or the Peter McKinnon's where you go, but first let's get coffee kind of thing. And I remember in the first beginning stages of my YouTube video stuff, I would do stuff where I would take my kids to, like, I'd wake up, I'm like, okay guys, we're building this, and I would take my kids to school, I'll drop them off, and I'm like, okay, so I'm driving the car, talking to my cameras, like, hey, all right, so we're going to go home, we're going to do this. Again, nobody knows who I am yet. I haven't established any kind of like audience or anything like that. And I remember sending you a video or two, and you like, can you just, I was like, hey man, like, I don't think we even like met in person. I was like, hey man, can you just like look over the stuff and just give me some feedback? And you, this is what you did. You said, who's your audience, male or female? Mostly. I was like, oh, mostly men. You go, guys don't give a fuck about your kids. and I was like, oh no, but that was the best advice, because it was like, Roger that.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's hard. I mean, it's like if you go to a dive bar, like let's say you started like a low end bar, and they're like, oh, we're gonna muddle up this mojito, and like every one of your customers just wants like a shot and a beer, right? Like, yeah. What you're doing isn't wrong. It just might be what your audience wants at that time. But at the same time, if you start to slowly change your clientele for that bar, you eventually might get to the point where you're serving higher end drinks with better margins and developing like a higher end clientele that does love those things. So it's not that it's wrong or right, that you should do this or not do that. It's, you want to be connected to your output versus how it's being received, and like remove your ego from it, not get your feelings hurt. And it's why soliciting good advice and being ready to actually listen to it is so important. For me, my mistakes early on were having a little bit of a chip on my shoulder as someone that spent a lot of time and money on my architecture education and background. I kept trying to sort of like prove to everyone I was still a really great world-class designer, and even though I was doing YouTube. So I kept trying to interject these kind of like more sophisticated design ideas that YouTube just didn't care about. And I was doing that. It was my own hang up and my own sort of flaw. Like, no one was asking for it. But I kept feeling the need to kind of put that back in. And really, what I thought that each video had to sort of represent everything who I was, when really some of the things are just like, over time, like, our taste becomes representative of who we are. But like each individual thing that we eat, it might just be you're at an airport and you're hungry and you got to grab a turkey wrap, even though you think turkey wraps are kind of boring. Sometimes you just got to get something out production wise. So I think that's the challenge early on, is that you get really grandiose and you haven't done a lot of repetitions. So you think each repetition is so super important. When really what this is a long-term game. Career is always a long-term game. So it's really about getting comfortable, getting a really energy efficient swing so that you're not efforting with each swing of that hammer. You're kind of just gliding through it and you're beating people over time.
Yeah. What I wanted to add to that, it reminded me, so for the longest time, obviously I'm running out of big projects to do at this house. So we're going to be putting on the market here next spring. And for the longest time, and I want some land, right? The whole shop idea and just more wiggle room. And for the longest time, Irene and I would talk about the new land or the new piece of property that we would have. And it was all revolved around that it had to be another fixer upper, right? Because that's what pays the bills around here, right? Because it's all content. And, and she was kind of on board for the same idea. Well, it has to be a fixer-upper. Absolutely has to be a fixer-upper. And then the more we started looking for properties as of recently, the more we saw that a lot of these big properties, the 3 acres of land that we wanted, they had these houses that, like, you could only move so many walls before you have to just knock the whole house down and start all over again. And so my biggest fear was always like, my biggest fear was like, we can't build a house. Though she really wants new construction, I was like, we can't build a house because there's no content behind that. And I'm purely saying that from one perspective of seeing a few other content creators in our space who kind of are either doing it or try doing that. And from my personal observation, I'm like, it's not performing as well. Like I'm almost grading it. But then I remember, and this is, you were really monumental in changing my mind about this. It was just only a few weeks ago, I went for a dirt bike ride just to clear my head. And, which I want to ask you later on of how do you clear your head for inspiration? But I was riding and I remember you popped in my head where I remember you told me, I don't remember what projects we're talking about, but you said, this is a long-term game. Like, we're in it for such a long haul that you might as well be trying different stuff. And it dawned on me. I was like, I remember I did a video for a sponsor where I turned a regular solid door into, putting a window into it. And I've seen other content creators and their videos, in my perspective, didn't do as well. And then I did mine, and I think I cultivated an audience in a way where, like, it performed extremely well. So, like, you're really monumental. Where I came home, and I told Irene, I was like, hey, I think let's just build a house then. You know what I mean? Because I was like, she's like, what changed your mind? I was like, Ben. She's like, Ben who? I was like, Ben Uyeda. I was like, oh, she's like, what did he say? I was like, well, I don't know. Like 2 years ago, he told me that you're in it for the long game. You might as well. And I was like, oh, it was big. It was big for me.
Okay, so it's funny, talking to a lot of people about similar size projects, right? Here's the pros and the cons. It worked out really well for me with the container house, right? So we started a brand new channel, 20 million views across 9 videos. So averaging more than 2 million views per video, which is really good for YouTube. So we made great money on the content. Spent about $200,000 on the house and land, everything all in. Sold, made about $30,000 to $40,000 on Airbnb revenue, and then sold it for $385,000. So it was a win. But a workflow, the numbers and the bullet point numbers, huge win. But it was really challenging, and it didn't feel like a win until the very end. Because the challenge was, it was a huge outlay of money. And this was all sort of like out of pocket. There was no construction financing or anything like that. So the financing was the first hurdle that made it very difficult. When you buy an existing house, you don't have to put a lot of money down. The interest rate on your mortgage is tax deductible, right? So, and you can finance it out. You can also use it as space to store stuff and even potentially live in as you renovate it. So offsetting some sort of rent. Building from scratch, even if you end up with a more valuable thing that you're eventually going to be able to sell for a lot, that's exactly the way you want. What you're missing on is you're going to have about much closer to 30 or probably, yeah, about 25 to 35% of the total cost of the construction on hand as cash as a contingency, not a down payment. It's a little bit different for construction financing for the whole project, right? So you don't, even if your house ends up being cheaper because you build it and tailor it and there's less waste because you're not moving walls that are already been paid for, the inability to finance as much of it might make it less efficient. The other thing is you can't stay there as you're building it, which means that you have to have a different place to stay in and a different line of expense while you're building this new house. So those are sort of like the things that make it difficult. From a content standpoint, is I built the entire house and was finished before I released the first video. And so that's really hard to do if you're sort of like hand to mouth as an influencer. So like you kind of have to make the content and release it to keep money coming in so you can keep building. Luckily, I built up enough of a cushion to where I could keep Homemade Modern going just at a slightly reduced schedule and wait till the entire house was done before I released the first video on the house. So other people I know have sort of vlogged it as they've gone, and it's been much harder for them to get the same performance because they don't have like a finished shot to tease the series with. So it will take some creativity. It's absolutely doable. The other question would be, is it possible to do a hybrid, right? So if you're looking at, are you looking at, how big are the lots that you're looking at?
Oh, about we're looking at between 2.5 to 3 acres.
Okay, so one of the things you might consider, right, is where you could take advantage is you might look at a smaller house on 5 acres, because then you could subdivide it into 2 lots. So what I would suggest is figuring out a strategy where, and this is what I think it would be the scenario that I think might be more efficient for you, but disregard because you know your situation better than me. Sure. But what if you found a single family house on 5 acres and it's not at all what you want, but you go, it's a decent house, decent bones, and the lot's big enough. So what you could do is you finance that. So, 5 to 10% down, you got a place to live, and you fix it up. You do the low hanging fruit. You get it all cleaned up. Now you have a place to stay. And the minute you buy it, you start subdividing the property. So it's just a legal process that will take some time. And that's why I'd say getting a 5 acre, because you could then subdivide it to 2.5 acres. You're, probably be like 5 to 8,000 in legal fees, but you get a whole other separate parcel of land. Then you build the new house on that new piece of land while you're living, right next door to it, right? Yeah. And then you've made your sort of project flow. You've shortened the commute. That means, and that's so huge because that means you're getting an extra half hour of work time every day, which over 100-day project really adds up. It's going to be
100%. Yeah.
So then you also can rent one asset, sell one, and do something like that. But it's tied into the mortgage, and you have a place to live right next door the whole time. You're also going to know all the utilities for that site. You're going to be able to do sort of site improvements that benefit both houses. So that would be something that I would consider is just go 5 or 10 acre lot with a single family house and then subdivide the property. That way you're still tapping into that easy, because banks hate financing construction because it's so risky, because a lot of construction projects don't get finished. Yeah. But you can get such good financing, particularly right now with an existing single family house.
Wow. No, that's great. That's great. That's a great idea. I mean, it's impressive to see you kind of working around all these ideas. Like, I mean, I don't think that thought even crossed my mind to kind of go on a larger scale and then break it up. In fact, what I thought you were going to say is, just take that spot, remodel it, and then just like sell off that house, on a whatever quarter acre lot or something like that, and call it good. But no, that's a brilliant idea. You come from my assessment, you come from like your siblings are all like in the creative space, right? I think your brother is like a designer of some sort as well, right? And then I met Jess, or he's a farmer. No, is he a farmer?
Yeah, he has a ranch down in Argentina. He sort of moves back and forth between sort of cannabis cultivation in California, and then he has like an off-the-grid farm and ranch in right outside of Cordoba, Argentina, where they like grow food, and they have like a organic chocolate business and a bunch of other food businesses. So that's my older brother, Nate. He kind of looks like Johnny Depp from Pirates of the Caribbean.
I
He's got
saw a
the long
picture of him.
hair. He's
Yeah.
got like
Yeah.
got a lot of like weird flair and bracelets, and you know, or he either looks like that or a really skinny, tiny Jason Momoa.
Like before all the steroids, right? Where do you get all your inspiration from?
So for me, I don't think of inspiration as this like energized, oh my God, most brilliant idea ever. For me, inspiration is like kind of random thinking that's just taken a little bit farther, right? So it's like, it's not like lightning bolt strikes you and you like genius is imparted upon you. It's much more like we all daydream and think about silly stuff. It's just being serious about the ridiculous. So my expression that I really like is seriously ridiculous, but ridiculously serious. Like I think that's really the source for non-genius inspiration. There's people out there. I've met some truly brilliant people in my life, and they're rare and they have special abilities into like almost like the athletic version of intellect. For myself is I'm a very smart person, but I don't consider myself in that class. So it's how do I manufacture runs at sort of scale, right? Like I don't have this like God-given perfect swing. It's like I have to figure out how to get on base a lot. So it's being relaxed. I think it's hard to come up with ideas when you're, feeling negative or stressed. It's being relaxed and not killing your ideas too quick. It's like, it's really easy to think of an idea and then to think of something, oh, that won't work because of this. But if you just can hold off on that just a second to try to find a solution before you kill it for its impracticalness, that's where I think a lot of the good inspiration and ideas come from.
Oh, interesting. So then, do you have people that you that kind of so? Do you have people that you look up to, maybe that you have never met, that that you see them constantly downshifting and pouring into another thing and constantly moving from one thing to another? Do you have those people? Because I have about 3 people in the back of my mind, and I was just curious for a person like yourself.
I actually think podcasts have really opened that up, because before podcasting and YouTube and this kind of informal media and the long format non-mainstream media, right? You only really saw curated images of people that was presented when they needed to promote something else. But podcasting and long format interviews, particularly with entrepreneurs or just thought leaders and stuff like that, gives you sort of lets you eavesdrop on casual conversations with really smart people. Most recently, I've been listening to all the Tim Ferriss interviews with a guy named Naval. If you just go to Naval on Twitter, he's sort of a finance tech guy and super smart, super philosophical, not cheeseball self-helpy, just good, straight up thought process applied broadly enough that it can be applicable for a lot of people. So there's a lot of, I like saying, I would say podcast because that's something that we all have access to. The danger is when I first discovered the podcast, How I Built This, which is a great entrepreneurial podcast. No, How I Built This is it's I don't know the production company, but it's stories of like famous kind of startups. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, and it's really well produced, and the stories are fantastic. So they have like one with like Mark Cuban that was really fun. And when it first came out, I listened to like all the episodes that were out. Like I listened to like the first like 20. And then it started to be diminishing returns because you start to pick up on the patterns. And I think there's this you can listen to too much inspiration and too much self-help, because each one of these times I was listening to somebody's 10 to 20 year journey compressed into an hour. And it's like, I'm only going to have one or two 10 to 20-year journeys in my life. So I don't need 100 versions of that. I just need to find the one or two that are closest to me and maybe pick up a couple. So you can have, it's like taking more vitamins isn't going to make you more healthy. There's a point of diminishing returns.
Oh, yeah.
So there's the same thing is true with inspiration or inspirational figures, where if you listen to someone, everything they've learned in their life to become successful, and then you do that with 10 people, you're not going to become 10 times more successful because you're not going to be able to implement all these brilliant tactics and tools that you learned. So you don't want to just be hoarding inspiration and good advice at a rate that you can't deploy it. So now I try to be, it's always good to read more books. But if you read a bunch of books and you haven't had time to implement what they taught you, why are you reading more books? Take the time out to actually implement the things that you got, right? So that's the thing I try to be mindful of, is my consumption of new inspiration, new tactics, new tools relative to actually having time to deploy them. So it's really easy to think that reading another book is always a good move. But if you haven't implemented the things from the last one, no. Take a week, create time for those experiments to actually see how they impact you, right? If you're going to watch another fitness video, but you didn't exercise that day, what are you doing?
Yeah. No, that's interesting, but I don't think I've ever heard anybody kind of put it in that perspective, because I think with me, I'm too busy thinking about executing, and what I'm catching you say is like, it almost seems like you almost crunch the numbers before taking on a thing. Whether, I'm not even talking about whether or not whether it's a liquor business or anything else. It's more of like, even your consumption of content, you're like, what is my ROI on this? What could I be more efficient at right now? So like that efficiency is just I don't know. I feel like most of us people just don't crunch that level of efficiency. We either are too afraid to execute. That's one extreme. There's the other end of the extreme where we're just consuming, or trying to execute and it's not going anywhere. But I think the middle ground is kind of, analyzing of the probability of receiving and executing.
I see this a lot with diet and exercise, right? Where like like there's a lot of like food that are labeled fat free that aren't necessarily good for you. And there's a lot of people struggling with like losing weight. So you see them just like their cart at the grocery store just loaded with like fat-free like cereal bars, fat-free yogurt, and all these extra things. And then there's like snacking on those, and they think that they're going to lose weight, and they don't, because it's much simpler than that. It's about calories in, calories out. Anyone that's not thinking in terms of that, and then how many calories you're burning. So anyone not thinking of that, that's trying to, look at like, oh, but this one has these antioxidants and this one's keto and this one's not. They're looking at details and at the expense of macros. So details are really important, and details can put something over the top, right? And attention to detail does help, but attention to detail at the expense of the basics is so dumb. So it's completely flawed to be like, just execute well in the basics and you're going to be super successful. No, it's not untrue, but it's not true by itself. And attention to detail doesn't always lead to quality. It leads to quality once the non-details have also been executed well. So it's really both. And you don't have to do either one to a great degree, but keep them in a hierarchy of impact. So, for example, it's like, I don't worry about my YouTube videos week to week. I worry about them, quarter to quarter or year to year. So I don't worry about like, this video didn't do well, this video didn't do well. I know, I've been doing this long enough. Some videos just aren't going to do well, but every year I'll have a bunch of videos that did way better than they should have too. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I'm going to worry about is if I have a year where literally no videos did well. Oh. Yeah. Right? But that's never happened.
That never happens, right?
Right. You always end up like, sometimes it's like 1 out of every 4 videos really pops off. Sometimes it's 1 out of every 6. Sometimes it's every other one. Or sometimes you get on a hot streak and you get a whole bunch in a row. But it's always going to even out over time. So spending time trying to overly micromanage that would just be upping my stress levels without necessarily corresponding to an uptick in productivity. So I just try to like, how do I stay loose? How do I, most importantly, enjoy it, have fun, experiment, not freak out, have a sense of humor when things fall flat on their face. And just because there'll be another one. We don't have to live and die on our box office receipts every time we hit the publish button.
Yeah, yeah. Ben, how is for a single stud like yourself, who's got a solid head on his shoulders and an impressive investment portfolio? How's the quarantine been treating you and little old Joshua Tree in the middle of nowhere? I mean, have you met a nice squirrel that you want to settle down with over there, or like what does that look like over there?
It's always great. It just is what you make of it. And quarantine. We have our little crew out here. So me, Mike, Jesse, Brett from Skull and Spades, and occasionally we'll have some visiting guest stars sort of pop through. Jimmy DiResta just came out with Rachel Metz recently. So we also got our animals, and I do quite a bit of travel, less so during quarantine, but I've had to work in a couple trips that were certainly made more complicated with all the sort of restrictions that you need. But, I've done a lot of cool stuff in my life. Most of the last 10 years I've been in major cities like Boston, New York, and LA. And they're super fun. So it's like, I think COVID, I was talking to Mike from Modern Builds about that, and we're talking about how productive it's been. And it's because we've been traveling less. Hasn't been these interruption breaks into it. So nothing lasts forever, good and bad. And so you don't fight, don't resist the situation and its imperfections. Just be like, oh, all right, so this will be a good time to like rearrange the workshop. And
I've seen your workshop. He needs some rearranging.
It does. So it's been a good time to sort of focus on some of these bigger real estate things and doing a lot more back-end architectural work. So you always just sort of adapt, and you keep a tight crew around you. So for me, that's like, my team, I guess, would be my sort of equivalent of sort of family. And, there's always a new connections to sort of be made on the sort of like social and networking front. But we're going to be doing some cool collaborations soon. I'm going to be probably heading out to New York to work on some projects with my buddy, the comedian Andrew Schultz.
Oh yeah, shout out to Andy. He hilarious guy.
Yeah. So, I think like I don't worry about sort of social to work balance on like a weekly or daily thing. Again, I look at that balance over the course of the year. Did I maintain good relationships and friendships? Did I get a lot of work done? Like a week is very deceiving. You could be perfectly balanced in a week, but not make any progress because you're so, evened it out. It might be that you have to be head down and just jam on work for like a month straight to really crack the code and figure that out. But then if you do that, take the time to spend some time with friends and family to do the qualitative. But it might not be efficient to evenly distribute it into this like perfect week that you just put on repeat.
No, beautiful, beautiful. Did COVID teach you anything that you're gonna like change around about your kind of like? Do you feel like you're gonna go back to traveling as much as you did before, or is there anything that COVID kind of brought to your attention that you're gonna change?
Yeah, I think it from the business side, the most interesting thing is it's been an undeniably and this is just from a business standpoint, because I do take these things very seriously. And I know 3 people that, former professor and a couple of my friends' parents passed away from this. So I think this is a huge thing. I think the thing that it taught people was how important domesticity is people suddenly realized that And a lot of my best friends all live in like cities. So it's like they don't have to spend any time at home. If they're living in New York or Boston, they're like probably 4 of their meals a week are like out at restaurants. Yeah. They're doing a lot of cool stuff. They all live in like really cool condos or townhouses or apartments. But people that make a lot of money don't necessarily have great domestic environments. And I think what this pandemic taught us is that when the shit hits the fan, could be spending a lot of time at home. Do you actually like where you live and how it's set up? And I think that is the question a lot of people are dealing with. And when you think about what me and you sort of do for a living, is we answer those questions and we show you recipes to how to improve that. So I think that's been the big opportunity, is that everyone's realizing domesticity is super important. Everybody's cooking more, building more. I mean, all the home improvement centers and tool companies have had pretty outstanding years from a sales standpoint. Amazon's just through the roof. So I think that's the lesson, is domesticity is really important. And I think to expand upon that farther is, over the last like 15 years, there's been a huge migration to cities. Cities have been expanding as sort of population hubs. I think we might be seeing, if at the very least, a slowing of that growth and possibly a retreat from that growth. Whereas there's also, like, we're at a very low point for single family homes for sale on the market. I think there's only about 1.2 to 1.3, and that's the lowest it's been in a really long time in the country. So I think that's the thing that everyone's thinking about is, if something goes wrong with the world, where are we going to be stuck? And do I actually like my home, and what can I do to make it better?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was a big eye opener for me as well. I think I used to consider myself being an extroverted person. And then I think somehow by working from home and creating, this persona online, when I turn on the camera, my energy level goes, up a few octaves. And so you're running at this high pace. And then when you're done with it, you're like, I don't want to be around other people. You know what I mean? Like, I just kind of want to be to myself. And then what kind of home do I have? Do I have an environment that I could have meat in the freezer, or do I have a nice comfortable backyard where I can go and throw some wood in the fire and then just chill out there, listen to music and smoke some, cigar.
An idea for you, right? So I think you need to make, like, I know you're gotten into sort of compound bows.
Yeah.
Recently. So I think what you need to do is you need to make like the ultimate like man bathroom, where you can like sit on the pot and there's like a little door that opens up. And there's like a target like 40 feet away. And you're just sitting there like multitasking.
I might have to, Ben, I might have to take you on to that. Last time you gave me a project idea was a sauna, and that video blew up. So I, whatever you speak into existence, I acknowledge it, bro. I'll run with it.
Yeah, the sauna project is great. I mean, it's just, I knew you would do well with that project because, one, I think your physicality and your enthusiasm lend itself really well to like big construction heavy projects like that size. And a lot of people, most people in our space hate doing projects that big because they're physical. They're a lot of hard work. But your mentality. This is where that kind of like Jocko Goggins kind of mentality. It's awesome for projects like that, where it's like it's not a complex project, but there's a lot of repetition in it, and there's a lot of moving heavy stuff. But you're going to grind your way through that. So a lot of people avoid that, which means there's not a lot of those builds on this sort of YouTube space. Yeah. So it's a low supply that suits itself to what you're good at. So I think those things will like continue to do pretty well. So when we talked, I was like, oh yeah, this is something Alex will crush.
One thing and I'm gonna let you go here pretty soon because I know your time is valuable. One thing I always kind of have these discussions with my wife about certain things like that, about like I was never I realized that I'm not fearful of people steal. Like you were really, what's cool about you is that you give away a lot of information, right? Like I mean, I remember just talking to you in what was that, Atlanta 2 years ago, and you're like, you know what you should do? Rogan is talking about saunas. Like you should build a sauna. They're really sought after. And then like we were in Joshua Tree, and you're like, you know what you should do? You should build this like smoker Traeger drills, thing, and can I do that? Is that okay? Like, I mean, I know it's your idea. You're like, yeah, go for it. So you give all this stuff away. And I got like, the more I started coming up with my own stuff, I realized that I wasn't fearful of people in our space starting YouTube channels or new YouTube channels or coming up with certain ideas. Like I was never really threatened by any of that, because I realized that ideas, like, anybody can have a better idea than the next person. But I feel like with me, I was like, I don't think anybody can outwork me. You know what I mean? Like I like that. Like I'm not a very competitive person when it comes to sports. I don't really follow sports. I like watching the UFC, but if we play board games, I'm not a competitor, a competitive person about that. My wife wipes the floor with me every time we play any of the board games. I don't like to strategize. I don't like to think when I don't have to. But when it comes to my work ethic, I will work harder than the next guy, the longer than the next guy. And that to me, it's like that's the darkest part of my brain. That's like the Goggin side is like, all right, motherfucker, like let's go to work on this. Like if that's too big of a project for you, I'm going to do it. So yeah, no, it was a big eye opener that kind of gave me this like, oh, I'm not threatened by anybody, and I'm not threatened by anybody's competition, like everybody, we're all in it together.
Right. So it's funny, right? Because like the ability to do high amounts of manual labor, our educational system has taught us that that's not like, oh, you don't make money digging ditches kind of a thing, right? Or chopping wood, right? Like it's almost sort of thought of as not smart labor. But for what we do, it's sort of an exception. So let's say if you take all the other kind of YouTubers in our space, if you can get, because you're in shape, you're high energy, and you got a good work ethic. If you can get 10 hours of productivity where someone else in our space is only getting like 6 hours, like when I do kind of home renovation projects, I get caught up in too many sort of calls, get interrupted. Also, I'm getting kind of older. So it's like, I bet you if we were working side by side, you'd be getting 8 to 10 hours in of like solid build, and I'd be getting like 5 to 6. So if you magnify, that doesn't seem like a big advantage on any one day, right? But if you do 4 or 5 of these bigger builds a day, and you're in a competitive environment with people like me that can only get like 5 to 6 hours of those days done, you're going to be able to consistently produce more of these like mid-sized kind of home renovation projects. Whereas I procrastinate so much on anything that involves tile. Like I love watching your bathroom videos because I'm just like, God damn it, he did it again. Like it's executed really well. And I'm like, man, that project would take me twice as long, and I'd outsource a bunch of it, but then have to have meetings with the tile guy and like explain it, and have to shoot around it. And so that physicality, which doesn't seem like a super advantage in today's complex digital environment, but when it's compressed to all of a one-man crew that's shooting and setting up the camera and shooting all the content and being on camera and also just getting it done, so you reduce the total numbers of days for the shoot, get the video footage to the editor faster, it's a huge advantage. If you can do those videos in 2 weeks, where most people in our space would take them twice as long, that's a really big thing. So it's why I sort of suggested the kind of saunas film. I think that's where you're going to continue to kind of really set yourself apart. Like you're a very good woodworker. You have a good general aesthetic, especially like when you and your wife sort of team up. So you always got good thumbnails, and the interior design stuff is always spot on. But I think it's your ability to kind of have good looking outcomes, but really power through these bigger projects that a lot of people avoid. Most of the people in our space, they'd rather do a coffee table than a whole bathroom renovation, because it's like, so it's like your willingness to take on those big things is, I think, what's really been setting you apart and why your channel's growing so much in the last, year or so.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that and acknowledging that. I'm excited to take a little bit of a downshift, with this whole beginner builder series where we're just simplifying a lot of these projects. And I think I think I have high expectations for it for performing well, simply because I feel like if I was to do these projects when I first started my YouTube channel, I don't think I had enough of an audience. And I think now we've cultivated enough of a demand, like just feeling some of the feedback that I've been getting from some of the viewers, that they're now like, okay, so you've got our attention. Now, can you make something that I'm actually going to be halfway capable of creating? So we'll be excited to see what it does. Man, Ben, thank you so much, man. Thanks so much for hopping on here, doing this thing. The way we always kind of end up this podcast is so it's the Next Door Neighbors podcast, and we'll just have you say I'm Ben Uyeda, and then use an adjective to describe what kind of neighbor you would be.
Oh, I'm Ben Uyeda, and I would be I am the messiest neighbor with basically Burning Man going on in my backyard 365 days a year.
That's so accurate too, because I've seen your house in your backyard.
Yeah, well, the new house is coming along, so next time you come out, next
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, it'll be
Oh,
the new place.
man, I appreciate your you hopping on this, and man, more than that, I appreciate your friendship, man. Hey, have a great night, brother.
You too, buddy.
All right, see you, bro.